Midnight settled over Beacon Hill in layers of damp spring mist, yet Ava Reed lay awake in the marrow-quiet apartment she once called a haven. She listened to her husband's breathing and measured each inhale against the memory of earlier years when Trevor Reed's dreams had sounded steady, hopeful, forward-looking. Tonight those breaths felt practiced and shallow, as though rehearsed for an audience. Ava rose, bare feet brushing the cool oak floorboards, and padded down the narrow hall toward her home office. The soft hum of her workstation usually soothed her like a distant river, but the glow behind the half-closed door looked brighter than the machine's usual sleep cycle. She paused, the metallic taste of unease on her tongue. Through the gap she glimpsed Trevor hunched over her keyboard, shoulders tense beneath a charcoal robe that still carried the creases from packaging. His fingers danced across the keys in rapid succession. The screen showed her financial dashboard, not his. Ava's heartbeat stuttered. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of compromises, yet she had never seen him inside her workstation at night. Trevor closed a browser window, slipped a mobile handset from his pocket, and captured the display before shutting down the monitor. He moved with the twitchy confidence of someone who believed darkness erased footprints. Ava stepped back into shadow, watched him turn off the desk lamp, and timed her own breath to the hallway clock until he disappeared toward their bedroom. She waited a full minute before pushing the door wider. A faint warmth lingered on the keyboard. The screen stayed dark, but the machine's fan spun faster than idle, evidence of recent strain. Ava eased the chair aside and wiped a trembling hand across the surface, gathering her composure. She could confront him now, demand an explanation, ignite an argument that would keep the neighbors awake. Instead she exhaled slowly, shut the door, and walked back to bed with a quiet plan beginning to bloom. Morning light painted thin gold lines across the kitchen tiles when Trevor served himself espresso and whistled a tune Ava did not recognize. He wore a crisp linen shirt she did not remember buying and an expression of secret triumph. "Busy day," he said, brushing a kiss across her cheek. "I might swing by Logan Airport." A colleague offered a last-minute invitation to Paris for a consult. "Paris," Ava echoed, stirring her coffee until the spoon clinked. "What kind of consult?" "A finance presentation," he replied too quickly, eyes drifting to the marble countertop as if answers hid among the veins of white quartz. "Short trip. Should be back before the weekend." Ava nodded, though her mind began stitching threads. Trevor's design firm had lost its biggest client 2 months earlier. The next paycheck was uncertain. Yet he spoke of Paris like he ordered takeout. She let him leave with a careless safe flight, then watched from the window while his rideshare disappeared into morning traffic. At Sentinel Security, where Ava managed digital forensics, the training lab buzzed with the launch of a new internal exercise. She had engineered a dummy credit account that mimicked live banking data but was wired to send real-time alerts to a sandbox dashboard whenever a transaction occurred. The system taught junior analysts how to trace fraudulent behavior from the first suspicious swipe to the final arrest report. Ava named the project Fortuna, after the goddess who spins fates both lucky and cruel. By late afternoon the sandbox map was clean, as expected. New analysts pored over stale test logs while Ava prepared documentation for next week's drill. Yet a private message pinged her phone just before she powered down. Alert, transaction approved. Merchant, Lux Time Jewelers. Amount, $5,000. Paris. A second message stacked beneath the first within seconds. Merchant, Imperial Suites Hotel. Amount, $11,000. Paris. Her hand tightened around the device. No trainee possessed live access. Only she held the card's metadata, stored inside an encrypted vault and never copied. Someone had taken the bait, but from outside the walls of Sentinel Security. Ava closed her office door and paced a slow circle, letting logic guide emotion. The data could not be guessed. It had to be lifted directly from her machine. From within her home. The memory of Trevor's robe, the glow of the monitor, the hurried snapshots, each image sharpened until doubt bled into certainty. She logged into the sandbox console and toggled the escalation switch that forwarded every new alert to a private alias monitored by federal financial crime investigators. The protocol was designed for classroom demonstration, yet now it felt chillingly real. Another ping. Designer Boulevard Boutique. $7,000. Paris. The numbers rose like a tide. Ava imagined Trevor strolling along the Champs-Élysées, tasting victory and ignorance in equal measure. He believed he had stolen a normal credit line, but in truth he had triggered an invisible tripwire that spanned 2 continents. She sank into her chair, hands steady now, and began saving the transaction logs into an evidence folder titled Quiet Dawn. She drafted an email to her longtime attorney, Harper Quinn, requesting a meeting after work. Each sentence flowed with clinical clarity. Then she opened a clean notebook and wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page. He chose the game. I will choose the rules. As dusk settled over the city, Ava stepped outside and let the evening breeze cool her flushed skin. Far away, the lights of an outbound flight cut across the darkening sky, heading east over the Atlantic. She watched until the plane vanished beyond the horizon, then turned back toward her apartment with new resolve thrumming in her veins. Inside, her phone vibrated again. Another alert. Another indulgence. She lifted the screen close, read the numbers without blinking, and smiled, a quiet, contained smile that belonged to someone who saw every chess piece moving exactly where she expected. Tomorrow would begin a storm that Trevor did not yet fathom. Tonight Ava drifted to sleep knowing Fortuna's will had already spun. The next 3 days unfolded like a high-stakes simulation, only this time the stakes were real, and Ava controlled the board. Trevor's digital footprints glittered across the sandbox system like breadcrumbs left by a careless thief. Every hour brought a new notification: luxury boutiques, rooftop dinners, private car hires. He wasn't hiding. He was celebrating. Ava's fingers moved quickly across her keyboard, categorizing each charge, time-stamping the logs, and exporting mirrored copies to her attorney Harper and Agent Grant Bishop, the federal investigator assigned after Ava activated the fraud detection escalation protocol. She had never spoken to Grant before this case, but his first message had been swift and clear: stay calm. Don't alert him. We're watching. That afternoon, Ava met Harper in a quiet cafe off Tremont Street. The lawyer's brown leather briefcase was already open when Ava arrived, her tablet glowing with updates. He thinks he's invincible, Harper said, scrolling. This isn't some casual misuse. He's crossed into federal territory. We're talking grand larceny, digital fraud, unauthorized access. He stole from me while I slept, Ava replied quietly. Not even metaphorically. He used my trust like a keycard. And thanks to your setup, Harper added, tapping her screen, he practically walked into the trap barefoot. This isn't just theft. It's documented intent. Ava leaned back, folding her arms. He thinks he's winning. That's the part that almost makes me laugh. Harper nodded. Let him keep thinking that. The more he flaunts it, the easier this becomes in court. As they finalized the timeline and discussed logistics for a potential arrest, Ava's phone vibrated with a soft buzz against the wood table. Another transaction. This one, private yacht charter, Ken. $15,000. You've got to be kidding me, Harper muttered, glancing over Ava's shoulder. He's out there playing Bond villain while we're tightening the net. Back home that night, Ava sat in the dark, watching the city lights flicker beneath her window. She didn't feel anger. She felt focus. Her marriage had been a slow erosion of boundaries, each betrayal sanded down until it seemed almost tolerable. But this was fire. And fire, she'd learned in cybersecurity, either consumes or clears the path. Trevor returned 5 days after his departure, strolling through the door like a man arriving from a business trip, not a week-long crime spree. His tan was a few shades darker. His shoes gleamed. His luggage bore high-end brand tags she knew didn't exist in their shared budget. Thanks for the upgrade, he grinned, tossing his sunglasses on the coffee table. You really outdid yourself. Ava stood near the hallway arch, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Did I? Trevor plopped onto the couch and kicked his feet up. Come on, Ava. You've always been a little too safe with money. I just helped you live a little. Is that what you think happened? She asked, voice soft and low. He chuckled. Sure. We've both been working hard. You make good money. I figured it was time we both enjoyed it. Ava stared at him for a long beat, then turned toward the kitchen, texting Harper, *he's back. Ready to proceed, *. Trevor didn't notice. He was too busy admiring his new watch under the kitchen lights. Real gold, he said proudly. Picked it up in Monaco. You wouldn't believe the view from the hotel. No, Ava murmured. I wouldn't. The next morning, Grant Bishop called. It's time. We've got enough to move. We're coordinating with local PD for the arrest. Is he likely to run? No, Ava replied, looking across the living room where Trevor lay sprawled under a silk blanket, snoring. He thinks he's untouchable. Grant's voice was steady. Perfect. Let's bring him down while he's still wearing the crown. Ava hung up and poured herself a fresh cup of coffee. Her hands didn't tremble. Her mind didn't race. It was the calm of someone who had already seen the outcome. Trevor may have bought a fantasy, but she owned the reality, and it was about to break open. Later that day, as sunlight poured across their apartment, Trevor recounted his adventures over brunch. The steak in Zurich? Life-changing. Oh, and there was this rooftop bar in Nice. Had this 25-year-old scotch, worth every cent. Ava nodded, pushing scrambled eggs across her plate without eating. Her phone rested silently beside her, recording every word. He leaned in, smug. I gotta say, babe, you really came through. I didn't think you had it in you. She tilted her head. Had what in me? Trevor smirked. The whole no questions asked attitude. I mean, you didn't even blink. I half expected a lecture. But here you are, just letting me fly. I figured you'd explain yourself, Ava said. Eventually. He raised his mimosa in mock salute. Consider me explained. Outside, a police cruiser pulled into the curb. Ava didn't look. She just folded her napkin. You're a hard woman to surprise, Ava. No, Trevor, she said quietly, you just never looked hard enough. 3 firm knocks echoed at the front door. Trevor frowned. Expecting someone? Ava rose. Actually, yes. She opened the door to reveal Agent Grant Bishop flanked by 2 officers in uniform. Good morning, Miss Reed, Grant said. Is your husband home? Trevor stood, confusion turning into alarm. What the hell is this? Grant stepped forward. Trevor Reed, you are under federal investigation for fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to protected financial systems. Please come with us for questioning. Trevor's bravado drained like color from his face. Wait, what? Ava, tell them this is a mistake. Ava crossed her arms. Is it? As the officers cuffed him, Trevor shouted. You can't do this. You're my wife. Ava watched them lead him out, her voice a whisper that still cut through the hallway. Not anymore. The door shut behind them with a thud that seemed to echo through the walls. For a moment, Ava stood in stillness, her arms loosely folded, her eyes fixed on the spot where Trevor had stood seconds earlier. The silence he left behind felt electric, not a void, but a long-awaited exhale. No yelling, no slamming doors. Just closure beginning to take shape. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harper, * he's in custody. Grant says they're starting questioning now. Want to meet this afternoon to review your file, *. Ava replied with a simple yes, then set her phone down and walked toward the living room couch. The mimosa Trevor had abandoned still sparkled with bubbles. She poured it down the sink. She spent the next few hours cleaning, not just out of habit, but ritual. She packed what remained of Trevor's clothes into black donation bags and boxed up the trinkets he'd picked up on vacations she paid for. The golden cufflinks he never wore. The vintage record player he bought during his jazz phase. All of it went into the hall closet like memories she no longer needed to keep. By the time Ava arrived at Harper's office, her steps were light and precise. The walls smelled faintly of leather and lavender, and the tall windows let in just enough rain-washed light to calm her nerves. Harper stood, closing a folder as Ava entered. "He cracked in the first half hour," she said, no preamble. "Tried to spin it like he had your permission." Ava scoffed. "Of course he did. But Grant played it cool. Let him talk. Let him keep trying to paint himself as a man wronged by his wife's cold ambition." "Meanwhile," Harper said, tapping her laptop, "we send over the full recording you made of that brunch conversation." That, paired with the transaction trail and the device metadata, shredded every excuse he tried to make. Ava leaned forward. "What did he say when he realized we had him on tape?" Harper smirked. "He went quiet. Then tried to blame the system, said he thought it was a real card, not a trap. Claimed you tricked him." "That's rich," Ava muttered. "There's a hearing scheduled next week. He's looking at multiple felony charges. Given the dollar amount, they'll push hard for restitution." "And jail?" Ava asked. "Depends on how much he fights. If he takes a deal, he might avoid prison. But his credit, reputation, finances? All demolished." Ava didn't smile. Not out of pity, but because she wasn't here for revenge. She was here for reality. That night, Ava returned home to her now quieter apartment. The air was lighter. Even the ticking of the clock felt cleaner, less interrupted. She lit a candle, poured a glass of red wine, and sat at her desk reviewing the last few files in her quiet dawn folder. She opened a blank document and titled it, Recovery Timeline. Item 1, Initiate divorce proceedings. Item 2, Cancel all shared accounts. Item 3, Restore emotional bandwidth. As the list grew, her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. Unknown number. She let it ring, watched it stop, then restart. On the third call, she picked up. "Hello?" A low, familiar voice rasped through the speaker. "Ava, it's me." She didn't speak. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. But I messed up." "I see that now." Ava's voice was cool. "Took you long enough. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed." "You didn't just make a mistake," she said, her tone even. "You betrayed me. You violated my trust in ways I can't even begin to name." "And for what? A week of pretending to be someone you're not?" "I was desperate," he said. "I wanted to feel important." She blinked, staring at the city beyond her window. "Then maybe you should have earned it, not stolen it." There was silence. Then, softly, he said, "I thought you loved me." She exhaled through her nose. "I did. But I loved the version of you who hadn't shown up yet. The one you kept promising would arrive. The man you pretended to be." "I can be him," he said, voice cracking. "No, Trevor," Ava said gently. "You already had your chance." She hung up. Not out of spite, but because no closure could be more final than hearing your own voice stand firm. A week passed. Ava received the court summons for the preliminary hearing. Harper had already drafted the divorce documents. Grant forwarded the final arrest report, 46 pages, complete with appended evidence files and forensic screenshots. Ava didn't read every line. She didn't have to. Instead, she filed everything neatly into a labeled binder and slid it onto the bottom shelf of her office cabinet. A chapter closed. A name recorded. A lesson learned. She opened a new file that night, untitled for now. A document not about Trevor or fraud or fallout. Just a clean page. Hers to fill. The morning of the court hearing arrived wrapped in gray clouds and a soft drizzle that tapped gently against Ava's window panes. She rose early, not from nerves, but from habit. The rituals she had rebuilt, her morning jog, a strong cup of black tea, the tidy hum of her curated playlist, gave her grounding. This day would not define her. It would simply document what she already knew, that she had survived. At the courthouse, everything smelled like polished wood and stale paper. Ava sat beside Harper on the front bench, her navy blazer crisp, her expression unreadable. Across the aisle, Trevor looked disheveled for the first time in years. No tailored suit today, just a wrinkled button-down, damp from rain, and eyes that shifted constantly, scanning the room for allies he no longer had. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The proceedings began quickly, formalities, charges read aloud, documentation reviewed. Ava didn't flinch when her name was spoken. She didn't shift when the prosecutor described Trevor's actions in clinical terms: identity theft, digital fraud, unauthorized access of a financial system. Trevor pled not guilty. Ava expected that. His defense attorney mumbled something about intent and confusion, but Ava could see in Trevor's eyes he knew this performance wasn't working. The evidence, digital, time-stamped, voiced in his own words, was a wall no version of charm could scale. When the judge called a recess, Harper turned to Ava. "They'll try to delay the inevitable. But this isn't a question of if, only when." "He's cornered." Ava nodded. "Let them take their time. I've already walked away." She returned home that afternoon and stood at the threshold of her apartment before entering, just taking in the silence. There was something sacred about it now. It wasn't just a lack of sound, it was the absence of deception, manipulation, and that exhausting performance Trevor had carried with him like a second skin. Inside, she set her keys in the bowl by the door and turned on soft music. She had a weekend ahead with no plans, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like a gift. She began redecorating slowly. Not out of necessity, but as a kind of renewal. The sleek minimalist decor Trevor had insisted on gave way to soft textures and vibrant hues, throw pillows in teal and gold, new curtains that warmed the sunlight, a vintage reading lamp she'd once adored but tucked away because he had scoffed at it. The space began to reflect her quiet strength, clean lines, a subtle beauty she no longer dimmed for someone else's comfort. She replaced the old dining set with a second-hand table and 4 mismatched chairs that felt alive with stories. In the evenings, she sat there journaling, planning solo trips, sketching out new routines. One afternoon, her best friend Olivia dropped by, balancing 2 coffees and a small plant in a ceramic pot. "For your rebirth jungle," Olivia grinned, setting the succulent beside the kitchen sink. "It thrives in dry conditions. Just like you." Ava laughed, really laughed, and poured them both tea. They spent the afternoon talking about everything and nothing, about Paris not as a crime scene but as a future vacation spot. "He's trying to contact people," Olivia said at one point, voice lower now. "You're going to hear things. People might ask questions. Some might even doubt your side." Ava stirred her tea slowly. "Let them. You're not worried?" Ava looked her friend in the eye. "No. I lived with him. I know what's true." That night, as the city's hum dipped into silence and the candlelight in her living room flickered against the walls, Ava sat on her balcony. Her glass of wine rested beside her, her eyes on the skyline. It wasn't peace that had eluded her all those years. It was permission to choose herself, to let go without guilt, to believe that a fresh start didn't require anyone else's approval. The quiet wasn't empty. It was hers. And she intended to keep it that way. The weeks following the hearing unfolded like the slow pull of dawn over the skyline, quiet, deliberate, and tinged with something brighter than relief. Ava's days took on a new rhythm. Morning runs stretched longer. Her work at Sentinel Security flourished. Her apartment no longer felt like a place to recover, but a sanctuary she had fully claimed. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Harper called. Ava was mid-lunch in the company lounge, scrolling through vacation blogs, when her phone lit up. "He's taking a deal," Harper said, voice firm. "Full admission of guilt, full restitution, no trial." Ava set her fork down. "And the terms?" "He avoids prison, but it won't be pleasant. 3 years of probation. Mandatory community service. He pays every cent back. His accounts are frozen, his credit wrecked. He'll be legally banned from handling any financial systems or tech without oversight." Ava felt the muscles in her shoulders release, like a pressure valve had been turned. "So it's done." "Almost. You'll be notified when the final papers are processed. But this means no courtroom drama, no drawn-out cross-examinations. Just signatures. And closure." Later that evening, Ava sat by her window as a breeze drifted in, carrying the scent of spring rain off the cobblestone street. She poured a glass of wine and stared out at the distant lights. It was over. Not just the case, but the weight of waiting for a reckoning that finally came. But not everyone moved on quietly. A week later, another unknown number appeared on her phone. Ava hesitated, then declined the call. Seconds later, a voicemail notification followed. Out of curiosity, or closure, she pressed play. "Ava, it's Trevor." His voice sounded different now. Tired. Thinner. "I signed the papers. You won. Okay? You don't have to pretend anymore. You can stop being this version of you." He laughed bitterly. "I don't even recognize you now. Maybe I never really did." Ava deleted the message without listening to the rest. She didn't need his permission to grow. She didn't owe him understanding. He had signed the deal because there was no other path left. And that was the only acknowledgement she needed. Olivia visited that weekend, carrying a box of croissants and an absurdly large scented candle. "To the era of clean exits," she declared, raising a coffee cup. "To the era of fewer crooks and tailored jackets," Ava replied. They laughed, sitting cross-legged on Ava's rug, surrounded by unpacked books and soft music. The conversation drifted from work to new plans, to the places Ava still wanted to see. "I booked something," Ava said, lifting her phone. 3 weeks from now. Solo trip to Iceland. Just me, hot springs, and the northern lights." Olivia blinked, then grinned. "You really did it. You're not just surviving, you're rewriting everything." Ava smiled but didn't answer. She didn't need to. The next day, Ava received confirmation from the court. The plea deal was officially accepted and logged. No further appearances required. No appeals. That night, as the rain tapped gently on her window and the hum of the city softened into hush, Ava stepped into her closet. She pulled out the last box, labeled simply then, and opened it. Inside were photos, ticket stubs, little notes Trevor had written during their better years. She flipped through them slowly, like pages of a book she once loved but no longer read. When she finished, she sealed the box again. Not with anger. Not with grief. Just clarity. She carried it down to the building's storage room and left it on the donate shelf. Walking back up the stairs, she felt lighter. A chapter hadn't ended. It had been rewritten. And for once, she was the author of every word. Ava woke the next morning with sunlight stretching across her bedroom like an invitation. No alarms. No whispered lies in the kitchen. No anxious scanning of text messages over breakfast. Just the peace of a new day entirely her own. She brewed her coffee slowly, savoring the scent, the weight of the mug in her hands. There had been a time when even small moments like this had felt rationed, when the emotional overhead of sharing her space with Trevor had shrunk her joy into corners. Now, the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. Emails awaited her from her team at Sentinel Security, a few questions about the next training module for interns. She smiled. She was mentoring now, not just managing. People looked to her not just for technical answers, but for the kind of steady leadership forged through fire. In the afternoon, Ava met with Grant Bishop at a quiet federal annex in Cambridge. It was a final formality, closing the investigative file. Grant handed over a redacted summary of the case, which she signed with calm assurance. "Just so you know," Grant said as he organized his files, "we rarely see cases like this resolved so cleanly. You stayed 2 steps ahead the whole time." Ava tilted her head. "I had years of practice reading through his misdirection. Once I applied that same skill set professionally, it all clicked." Grant gave a quiet nod of respect. "You built the perfect system. And he walked right into it thinking you wouldn't see him." "That's always how it is, isn't it?" she replied. "They assume you won't notice. They assume silence means ignorance." After the meeting, she walked through the rain-slick streets of Cambridge with her coat tucked close and her head clear. As she passed a bookstore window, a new title caught her eye. "Leaving was the beginning, Stories of Quiet Power." She didn't buy it, she didn't need to. She was living her own version. Back home, she opened her inbox to find a forwarded message from Harper, a legal notice confirming restitution payments had begun. Trevor's wages were now being garnished. The first transfer had already hit the court escrow. Ava stared at the number. It wasn't just a dollar amount. It was proof that she had shifted the balance, legally, emotionally, decisively. That evening, she received another email. This time, from an old acquaintance, a mutual friend who had distanced herself during Ava's unraveling marriage but now seemed eager to reconnect. The message was cautious. Supportive, but cautious. "I had no idea what he was doing to you. You always looked so composed. I thought you were the lucky ones. I'm sorry I didn't ask more. You always made it look easy." Ava read it twice. Then 3 times. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, she considered replying with grace, maybe even warmth. But instead, she simply closed the tab. She no longer felt the need to explain herself to those who only watched from a distance. Trevor, for all his charisma, had never truly seen her. He had seen her success as his safety net, her intelligence as something to admire only when it benefited him. He had underestimated the quiet patience she carried. He mistook it for softness. He never realized that the very traits he dismissed were the same ones that destroyed him. Ava picked up her pen that night and returned to her notebook, the one labeled Quiet Dawn. She began writing not about Trevor, or the case, or the courtroom, but about what came next. She scribbled down ideas for a new security course, Personal Defense Through Digital Awareness. Aimed at women. Practical, empowering. A way to turn her story into tools others could use. When she finished, she tucked the notebook away, poured herself another glass of wine, and leaned back into her armchair. Outside, the city sparkled with lights reflected on wet pavement. Inside, Ava glowed with something warmer than revenge. She didn't win because he lost. She won because she walked away without asking permission, and built something better in the quiet that followed. The first article came out on a quiet Thursday morning, tucked inside a regional business journal under the heading Cybersecurity Expert Aids in Federal Fraud Bust. Ava hadn't expected to be named, but there she was, highlighted as the architect of a real-world sting that had caught the attention of white-collar crime analysts. The journalists had done their research. The story respected her privacy, omitting the personal ties to Trevor, but the underlying narrative rang loud. She saw it coming, she stopped it, and she rebuilt. Within days, the piece began to circulate. Not viral, but steady. Colleagues shared it with proud emojis. Old college contacts sent messages of support. And somewhere buried in the notifications was a name Ava hadn't seen in months, Nicole. The same woman Ava had quietly suspected Trevor had once been seeing behind her back. The message was short. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Ava didn't reply. She didn't need to. The silence was her answer. Later that week, Harper forwarded a legal update. Trevor's probation officer had filed a compliance review noting his lack of cooperation with the court's financial education course. Another delay. Another childish tantrum in legal form. Still trying to act like the victim, Harper noted dryly. It's amazing how consistent some men are, even when cornered. Ava smiled without humor. He never liked being told what to do. Not even when it saved him. Despite the background noise of Trevor's resistance, Ava stayed focused on the forward motion. Her course proposal at Sentinel Security was accepted. She began outlining the curriculum, practical modules for personal digital protection, especially for women navigating vulnerable transitions like divorce, job changes, or domestic fallout. She named the course *Silent Systems. The irony wasn't lost on her. Trevor had always filled rooms with sound, jokes, arguments, half-baked ideas shouted across the kitchen. But it was Ava's quiet work, her silent systems, that had brought him to his knees. The first night she taught the pilot module, she stood in front of a small group of interns and mid-career professionals, hands steady, voice clear. She walked them through phishing traps, digital footprints, and the warning signs of internal breaches. She wove cautionary examples into the material, never naming him, never needing to. One woman in the back raised her hand during a Q&A. Have you ever used this in your personal life? Ava paused, meeting the question with a small, deliberate smile. Yes, she said simply. And it worked. The class laughed, unaware of the weight beneath those words. Ava moved on to the next slide. That night, back in her apartment, she lit a lavender candle and curled up with a novel she'd been meaning to read for months. Her phone buzzed once more. Another unknown number. Another voicemail. She debated letting it sit. But curiosity won. Trevor's voice crackled through the speaker, low and dragging like a man out of breath. I saw the article, he said. You really did it. You told the whole world, didn't you? There was a long pause. I'm never going to outrun this, am I? You made sure of that. Ava closed her eyes. Not out of emotion. Out of clarity. No, she whispered to herself. You made sure of that. She deleted the voicemail. No archiving. No saving for later. She didn't need proof anymore. The entire world already knew the truth, and more importantly, so did she. The next day, Ava received a handwritten card in the mail. No return address. The handwriting was vaguely familiar, probably someone from Trevor's orbit. Inside, it simply said, He says you ruined his life. I think you saved yours. Ava didn't smile. She didn't cry. She tucked the card into her quiet dawn notebook and wrote a single new line beneath her course notes. They call it damage. I call it design. Some echoes would keep chasing Trevor. But none would ever reach her again. Ava's days began to settle into a rhythm that felt like breathing for the first time in years. Not survival. Not tension. Just living. The kind of life she had always believed was reserved for other people, quiet, strong, self-directed, was now her own. She no longer woke with dread clawing at her ribs. No longer checked her phone for surprise charges, or gauged her mood by the weather in Trevor's voice. Mornings were hers again. Her playlist was hers. Her kitchen, once a battlefield of silent judgments and broken promises, now echoed with soft music and the scent of fresh rosemary bread. The apartment had transformed, slowly but meaningfully. She painted the walls a rich ivory and swapped the gray furniture Trevor had chosen for softer, earth-tone pieces that embraced her instead of impressing guests. The bookshelf she once shared with his unopened economics tomes now held her favorite novels, art prints, and framed photos from her travels, solo trips she had taken in the months since his arrest. There was a photo of her standing near the edge of a black sand beach in Iceland, wrapped in a mustard yellow coat and staring at the sea. Another captured her sipping coffee at a train station in Lisbon, the sun kissing her shoulders, her eyes peaceful. But the greatest shift wasn't on the walls or in the furniture. It was in her posture. In the way she walked through a room. In the conversations she had with clients and colleagues and strangers who asked what she did. "I teach people how to protect what matters," she now said without hesitation. One Wednesday, after finishing her second workshop for the Silent Systems course, Ava received a message from her department head at Sentinel. A major university had reached out. They wanted her to guest lecture. The topic, real-world applications of digital defense. She stared at the message for a full minute before replying. Not because she doubted her capability, but because it struck her that none of this would be happening if Trevor hadn't made his mistake. She didn't owe him credit. But she could acknowledge the truth: sometimes the fire that tries to destroy you becomes the light that shows you the way forward. She accepted the invitation. That weekend, Olivia threw her a paperwork party in celebration of Ava's finalized divorce decree and the last confirmed restitution payment. They ordered pizza, popped champagne, and danced in Ava's living room to the songs they loved in college. No more joint accounts. No more signatures in someone else's shadow, Olivia said, raising her glass. To Ava, who chose herself. Ava laughed, clinking her glass. To the woman I used to mute just to keep the peace. They toasted again, and by the end of the night, Ava's cheeks hurt from smiling. She thought about the final voicemail Trevor had left her, his voice strained, his words half-hearted. "I don't know who you think you are now," he'd said. She never responded. But she had answered him in every choice she made since. She was the woman who built a safety net so tight he hung himself in it. The woman who chose knowledge over comfort. The woman who rebuilt, not out of revenge, but out of reverence for her own future. That night, Ava sat by her window with a new journal and wrote a letter to herself. Not a goodbye to Trevor, but a hello to the woman who had always been waiting just beneath the surface. Asterisk, you were never meant to stay silent. You were never meant to shrink. Asterisk. Asterisk, you don't have to earn peace. You only have to choose it. Asterisk. The city was quiet. The lights below blinked softly, like distant heartbeats. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Ava felt free, not because someone else had left, but because she had arrived. Spring shifted the city's palette from cold grays to tender greens. Blossoms crept along iron fences, and cafe patios filled with quiet laughter and warmth. Ava walked through it all as if in sync with the season. Every step, every breeze, every sunbeam touching her face felt like confirmation that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Her guest lecture at Eastbrook University had been a quiet triumph. The auditorium had been packed with undergraduates, security professionals, and even a few professors who'd heard whispers of her story. Ava stood behind the podium, not as a victim, not as someone rebuilt, but as an architect of her own narrative. She opened with a simple slide, white background, black text, asterisk, what they don't teach you about firewalls, sometimes you need one in your life too. Asterisk. She walked them through case studies. Posed hypothetical breaches. Shared small, subtle stories that didn't name Trevor but carried his fingerprints all the same. By the end, several attendees stayed back to thank her, to share their own stories of betrayal, digital and personal. You made me feel less stupid, one woman whispered, tears threatening the edge of her voice. Thank you. Ava's reply was quiet but certain. You were never stupid. You were trusting. There's a difference. She left that night with a bouquet from the student council and a head full of possibilities. That single lecture sparked a new direction. Within weeks, she'd signed on to develop a full seminar series for the university's adult learning division. Word spread. She was invited to speak at a Women in Tech summit, where she sat on a panel beside executives, founders, and fellow survivors. Harper came to watch, seated proudly in the third row. After the panel, Harper handed Ava a manila folder. "Last of the paperwork," she said. "The restitution's complete. His compliance period is locked. And as of today, you're officially cleared of all legal entanglement." Ava accepted the folder without ceremony, knowing it didn't define her anymore, but it did mark a milestone. That night, she brought the folder home and slipped it into her office drawer, next to her journals. Not a trophy. Just a reminder. Trevor's name, once sharp in her throat, had become dull and irrelevant. She no longer heard whispers of him in hallway laughter. No longer expected his name to pop up on her phone. He had become background noise in a life that no longer had room for static. But one last message did arrive. An email from a name she hadn't seen in nearly a year, Trevor's younger sister, Maya. It read, "I know we haven't spoken. I was ashamed. I didn't know what he did to you until it was already too late. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. And thank you for walking away. It taught me that I can too." Ava closed the laptop and sat still for a long moment. Then she opened her reply window and typed only one line. "You don't owe me anything. But I hope you choose peace. It's worth everything." That weekend, she hosted a small dinner at her apartment, just Olivia, Harper, and a few new friends from her lecture circuit. They ate by candlelight, laughed too loudly, spilled wine on the rug, and talked about everything from cybersecurity trends to childhood dreams. At one point, Olivia raised a toast. To Ava, proof that rebuilding isn't just possible, it's powerful. The clinking of glasses rang like a bell of arrival. Ava didn't protest. She didn't deflect. She simply smiled and let the warmth settle into her bones. Later that night, as the guests left and the city quieted, Ava stood alone on her balcony, overlooking the twinkling windows of lives she didn't know but now felt connected to. She was no longer waiting for justice. No longer surviving betrayal. She was building something new, one class, one conversation, one page at a time. And her name, once tangled in someone else's mess, now stood for something far more enduring. She was Ava Reed. And this was her legacy, written without apology. Ava stood at the shoreline of the Amalfi Coast, the wind tangling her hair as gulls wheeled above the sapphire sea. The cliffs rose behind her like giants, and the scent of lemon blossoms drifted down from the terraces. This was her first true vacation since everything ended. Not an escape, not a recovery trip, just a beginning. She had booked it with quiet intention. No itinerary. No one else to consult. Just herself, her journal, and the world. Mornings began with handwritten letters to no one in particular. Letters about strength and solitude, about loss that made space for wisdom. Sometimes she'd sketch the curve of the waves or jot fragments of poetry that came without effort. Afternoons meant long walks through cobblestone villages and conversations with strangers in broken Italian. There was a freedom in anonymity, in being just Ava, the traveler, not Ava the survivor, or the speaker, or the woman who brought down a fraud. On the third evening, as the sun painted the water gold, she found herself at a quiet cafe near the cliff's edge. A man seated nearby asked if he could borrow her menu. He spoke gently, respectfully, and after a few words exchanged, he returned to his table. No lingering glances. No games. Just kindness. Ava smiled to herself, not because she was interested, but because she realized something: she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of trusting. Not of being alone. Not of starting again. That night, back in her hotel room, she opened her journal and turned to the last page of Quiet Dawn. For a long time, she sat with pen in hand, staring at the blank space. Then she wrote a single line across the bottom. "This is not the end." When she returned home weeks later, the apartment still smelled faintly of lavender and books. Her mailbox was full, mostly letters of thanks from women who had taken her course or heard her speak. One envelope stood out, thick, cream-colored, no return address. Inside was a hand-drawn sketch. Ava recognized the style. It was from a young intern she'd once mentored, someone who had gone through a difficult breakup and used Ava's course as her lifeline. The sketch showed a woman standing in front of a crumbling wall, holding a lantern. Behind her, a forest opened up wide, full of stars and trails unwalked. Beneath the drawing were 4 words, "Thank you for the light." Ava placed the sketch on her desk and sat down beside it. She didn't cry. She just breathed in the weight of what she had built, not from revenge or spite, but from a seed of survival she had chosen to water, day after day. She sent Olivia a voice message. "I'm back. Let's get dinner. I have stories, and I might finally be ready to get that puppy we talked about." Moments later, Olivia replied with laughter and a voice full of joy. Asterisk only if I get to name it. And I'm thinking something ridiculous, like firewall. Asterisk. Ava laughed aloud. Deal. That evening, she curled up on her sofa, the city glowing beyond her windows, her heart steady in her chest. Not broken. Not guarded. Just whole. She opened a new journal. This one didn't have a name. Not yet. And she began to write again, not about Trevor, or betrayal, or even survival. She wrote about building. About peace. About the quiet victories that never made headlines but changed everything. In that silence, Ava found her truest voice. And in the ruins he left behind, she built something better, something hers. It was never just about what he took. It was always about what she reclaimed. 6 months later, Ava stood backstage at a global cybersecurity conference in Berlin. The auditorium held over 1,000 professionals from across industries, tech giants, law enforcement partners, nonprofit leaders. Her name was printed in bold on the program beside her talk title, asterisk, "The Human Firewall, How Personal Betrayal Shaped My Strongest Defense." Asterisk. As her name was announced, applause rolled through the room. Ava stepped into the lights with ease, the stage no longer a source of nerves, but a platform she had earned. She opened with no dramatic preamble. Just a photo. A blurred screen grab of a transaction from a dummy credit card, the beginning of it all. This, she said, pointing, was the first signal. A click in the night. A man who thought he knew me. And a system designed to teach others, but ultimately, it saved me. She walked them through the timeline. Not to relive the betrayal, but to show the architecture of her defense, how knowledge, calm, and boundaries weren't just technical skills, but deeply personal ones. Midway through the talk, the room was silent. 1,000 minds thinking not just about breaches and firewalls, but about the ways we all guard our lives, or forget to. She ended not with a triumph, but with a truth. People will tell you that heartbreak isn't relevant to code. That love has no place in systems thinking. But I'm here to tell you, every breach I've ever studied began with misplaced trust. And every resolution began with the courage to look closely. The standing ovation was thunderous. But Ava didn't measure its value in claps. She measured it in what came next. A woman approached her after the panel, older, maybe in her 50s. She didn't introduce herself, just held Ava's hand for a long moment before whispering, "Thank you. That was my story, too. I just didn't know how to tell it." Ava nodded gently. "Then start. It's never too late to name your own truth." Back home, she launched a foundation under her name, the Read Project, dedicated to helping women rebuild digitally after domestic financial abuse. They offered workshops, digital cleanup services, and legal resource partnerships. Olivia joined the board. Harper became the legal advisor. Donations came in from across the world, some from victims, some from silent supporters, many anonymous. Ava didn't care about the source. Only the impact. She wasn't interested in legacy for the sake of pride. She was interested in what it could do. One night, long after midnight, she sat by her window, the city glittering around her. Her puppy, a scrappy golden mutt named Firewall, curled at her feet. She held a copy of her first published book, a memoir guide hybrid titled * Quiet Dawn, How I Built Myself from the Breach. *. It was full of stories. Some raw. Some sharp. All true. She opened to the dedication page. It read, * for anyone who was ever told they were overreacting. For everyone who stayed quiet too long. For the women who see everything and act anyway, *. Ava closed the book and looked out into the horizon. There were still more stories to write. More voices to lift. More firewalls to build, not just in systems, but in hearts. And she knew, without doubt, without apology, that she was the right woman for the job. The following spring, the world around Ava bloomed brighter than she remembered. It wasn't just the cherry blossoms lining the riverbank or the morning breeze curling through the curtains, it was something internal. A stillness. A certainty. A lightness that no longer needed to defend itself. She had lived through a kind of war, quiet and domestic, waged with charm and deceit instead of violence. And yet, here she was, planting herbs on her windowsill, laughing easily during long walks with Olivia and Firewall, saying yes to new invitations that would have once made her hesitate. It wasn't that the pain was gone. It had simply softened into shape. A scar, not a wound. One day, while preparing slides for her next seminar in Stockholm, an unfamiliar email landed in her inbox. Subject line, * interview request, feature on women rebuilding after financial betrayal. *. The sender was a respected journalist. Her note was kind, carefully worded. * Your story has circulated quietly for nearly a year, but never from your voice directly. We'd be honored to profile not just what happened, but what you did with it. *. Ava sat back in her chair. She stared at the message, remembering the dozens of times she'd drafted and deleted her story, choosing instead to keep moving forward, to teach through implication rather than headlines. But something shifted as she read it again. She wasn't afraid of the story anymore. She was the story. Later that week, she sat in a quiet studio, facing a woman with a notepad and a warm gaze. The questions were thoughtful. Not invasive. Not dramatic. What would you say to the version of yourself who first saw the fraud alerts? Ava smiled faintly. I'd say, don't flinch. This isn't your undoing. It's your blueprint. The article came out 2 weeks later. It didn't sensationalize. It celebrated. The title read, * From Breach to Beacon, How Ava Reed Built Safety from the Ashes. *. Within hours, messages poured in. Some from strangers. Some from women she'd unknowingly inspired. One message came from someone who had sat silently in the audience during her very first university talk. * You didn't know it, but that day saved me. I left him a month later. I got help. I have a job now. A lease. A laptop of my own. I even took your class. *. Ava read the message twice, then 3 times. She replied with only 4 words. * You saved yourself. Remember that. *. That evening, she hosted a small gathering on her rooftop. It was modest, just string lights, music, and a simple dinner, but it felt sacred. Near the end of the night, Harper leaned over and raised her glass again. You know, she said, people keep saying you were lucky you caught him. But that's not luck. That's brilliance. Ava clinked her glass. It's preparation. It's boundaries. It's listening to yourself when you want to look away. And that's when she knew, deeply and finally, that the light she now stood in had never been granted to her. She had carved it out of stone. The following week, she walked alone through a gallery where a local artist had showcased a series titled Reclaimed. One piece stopped her cold. It was a sculpture of a woman, worn, fractured, arms wrapped tightly around her own torso. But behind her, rising like wings, was a second silhouette, tall, open, lit from within. The plaque read, *, what she became when she stopped apologizing. *. Ava stood before it, breath caught in her throat, and smiled. She had stopped asking for understanding. She had stopped waiting to be chosen. And in doing so, she had chosen herself. This was not a comeback. This was her becoming.